Mackenzie,
Lemar.
the substance.
The fucking substance, though.
What a motion picture we watched.
It was
we're
an
gonna
experience. It was an experience.
Cinema. So I don't want to give. We want to keep this as spoiler free because we want to get right into spoilers pretty quick today. But really quick off the bat, without giving anything away, this movie's really about just body image and how you view yourself. So, you know, in your teen years, in your 20s, I think most of us are a little more self-conscious as we grow older. I hope that we get a little more confident in our bodies, but you know, it's America, it's the society we live in, not always that kind. But what was one thing that you always wanted to change physically about yourself?
Well, I think it's an oversimplification, and it's something that we've talked about before on the pod, so I won't like deep dive into it. But my accident, where I broke my whole damn face, made me very self-conscious about my whole damn face. Basically, I can find a bazillion flaws in it to this day, and I definitely did when I was younger. But
that's even shocking to me. Not just like to butter you up, but like you can't tell that you had any sort of ass. So that's surprising to hear, actually.
Well, I have lots of like little scars that people don't know are scars. Like there's little, I mean, even on this camera, it just doesn't pick it up. But like there's some stitches here that left a scar. This is not a birthmark, and it's a little washed out right now. But this is not a birthmark. This is a skin graft, and you can see me again, very washed out. But I have a trach scar. And also, I mean, my teeth are much better now after decades and decades and decades of dental work. But they were lots of like crooked care, like all kinds of things for a long time, braces for a bazillion years, all that kind of jack stuff. So, I mean, don't get me wrong. I am not a troll. I'm not saying that, but I just was very self-conscious about everything about my face and my like crooked eyes and my eyebrows being, like I wasn't allowed to like tweeze my eyebrows. So I thought it just made everything worse and like all this kinds of stuff. So I was just so self-conscious when I was a kid about my looks, but I made up for it in personality, so I was fine.
Thank you for sharing all that. That was very vulnerable of you, and I'm glad that you're where you are now. You're looking great.
Thanks. The makeup does all the tricks. No, I'm just kidding. What about you?
A bigger ass.
He's like, I really need some more badonkadonk in that trunk. It is just not sufficient.
I feel like the easy answer, I'm 5'4", so when I was younger, I obviously wanted to be taller because that's what every guy wants to be, especially when dating sites became a thing and it was very hard to match.
What was your goal height? Were you like,
even if I had gotten like 4 inches, that would have been like 5'8", 5'7", that would have been great back then. But to your point, I feel like if I had been taller from the get-go, I wouldn't have developed the personality and like the quickness, the wit that I have. So I feel like I'd be a totally different person. I'd be even more of an asshole, as hard as that is to believe.
Right. God bless. Thank you for not giving him those 4 inches. Jeez. Yeah. No, I agree with you. I think when you feel self-conscious in some way, I feel like you have to lean on something else, even if you shouldn't be, right? Like, even if you're a handsome, beautiful, gorgeous person on the outside, if you feel inadequate in some way, it makes you lean into some other things. I leaned into my nerd. I leaned into my theater kid. I think it turned out fine.
The only other thing that I always at one time in my, and it's still, I'm fingers crossed, it can still eventually happen, but I don't know if I have the commitment. Just at one time I would have liked in my life to have like visible abs.
Oh yeah.
I would work out a ton, but I would eat like shit. So I would always have that layer of just one time I wanted to go to the beach, or go as like shirtless Wolverine on Halloween one year. That was like the goal, and that just never happened. So maybe one day.
I had abs very briefly as a competitive swimmer. And even with how much I was working out, though, like that was not a consistent thing for as years and years and years of competitive swimming. And I did not have abs that whole time. But I had a couple periods where I had like a little bit of a 4-pack. Oh, I was so proud. And then it was gone. Like you stop swimming, it's gone. It's gone.
Yeah. All right. Well, let's get into this very body positive movie.
Yeah, that's what this is. All right. Welcome back to We Drink and We Watch Things. I'm Mackenzie.
I'm Lemar.
And we are coming in hot with like, I would say a mini-sode TBD, not totally
Mini-sode
sure.
spur of the moment.
Spur
Like,
of
we
the
just
moment
decided to do this, 2 nights ago?
Yeah, I think it's worth it. I mean, don't get me wrong. I think it's worth the ad hoc ep. But yeah, it's going to be a little different today. We are talking about The Substance.
Everybody's talking about The Substance.
Everybody is. It is currently in theaters, y'all. And if you don't know at least one person who has seen this, I know a few people who have seen this who have told me to go see it. And Lemar and I finally got around to seeing it. We actually, like, the foursome went, and boy, was it worth it. And boy, was it a conversation starter. I don't know about you. Before we get into it, like, did you just talk about this on the whole way home with Janelle?
Yes.
Yes.
Yeah. It was like this thing, that thing. Like, I'm going to give as little as possible away, because that's what people told me was, don't even bother watching the trailer. This is one of those ones I will say it depends on your genre. Like, if you're okay with sort of body horror,
yes,
but definitely go see this, because you will jaw on the floor. And there were lots of like, what the fuck was that, in the lobby of the movie theater, some in positive ways, some in negative ways. So it's a fun one.
And I think one of my favorite things, and I told you this at the theater, but I didn't like dig into it, and we'll go into it maybe a little bit later, but like, my thing was listening to everybody's reactions coming out of that film, and like going into the women's restroom and walking down the lobby and like hearing what people are saying, and the range of responses. Like, this is, I mean, if nothing else, guys, like, this is a thought-provoking film. But before we get into all of that, what are we drinking?
Well, Skylar was working a double today, so responsibilities fell on me. So we're drinking a terrible concoction. No, it's okay. It's very sweet, which is up my alley. But so this is 1 ounce of Citron vodka, 1 ounce of limoncello, a half ounce of Midori, and then an ounce of combined lemon lime juice. And I'm calling this Activator because I think my green got a little too dark, but it does kind of look like the Activator.
Yours isn't as neon-y.
So,
yeah.
Maybe a little less Midori in there, guys.
I also had an aneurysm at this recipe, y'all, if it makes you feel any better. I put mine in like an iridescent-y glass, so it gave it like this cool color. And I also feel like the substance is customized, so I use my like customized glass that has my name on it. It's the whole thing. So anyway,
I think if you like the really like sweet martinis or like Cosmos, you probably dig this, but it is very sweet. Cheers.
Cheers. So we're going to like blow through all the basics more so than normal. And we're going to give you maybe
so it'll only take like 16 minutes.
It'll only take 16 minutes instead of 35 minutes. No, really, I'm going to go so fast, I promise. Okay, right. But we're going to go really fast, and then we're also going to attempt to give you, which, by the way, I haven't even thought about. I'm saying this out loud in real time. We're going to give you a spoiler. Well, we're going to give you a plot summary and then a spoiler-free rating, which I don't even know how to do. So like, I'll let you know when I get there. So the basics are The Substance, the year 2024, and their current ratings, which again, as we know, could change. We're very early days yet, but the ratings right now, the IMDb ratings are 7.6 out of 10, which is pretty good. And then Rotten Tomatoes is 91% by critics and 73% by audiences. And I'm going to get
higher than I thought it would be. Like, just based on what I heard in the lobby afterward, I was maybe those people aren't jumping on Rotten Tomatoes as soon as I get home.
Yeah, I agree. I was a little surprised. I mean, again, I got to work out my feelings when we get there, but it's an interesting one. So I'm going to give you zero background on any of these people. We're going to go through them, give them a goog if you would like. The writer-director of this film is Coralie Fargett. And I looked that up. I think that's right. I think that's the right way to say that. No idea what she's done. Talk about it later.
She's done one other movie, but it's a French film. So
yeah. So I don't know. I mean, which, by the way, even just that little nugget you just gave me checks out. All right. Yes. So top cast. There's really only a handful of people in this film that you even see besides the two main leads that you even see at all. But the only people we spend the most time with are Demi Moore as Elizabeth Sparkles, and then Margaret Qualley, I believe that's how you say her name, and she plays Sue, the eponymous Sue with no last name. And then we also have Dennis Quaid, who makes an appearance a couple of times.
He's a delight.
He is
plays his part to a T. I think everyone plays their part to a T. I'll say that much.
well, also, like, I won't get into it too much, but I hear not great things about that man. So it feels like he just played himself.
IRL, really?
IRL, yeah. Hear not great things IRL. I have like a friend's dad worked with him on a bunch of films and not great things. A lot of not great stories in the industry about him, from what I can understand. But anyway, that's besides the point. He did a great job playing this role, is what we will say. And then the plot summary that IMDb gives us, reading this live in real time, guys, y'all tell me if it feels legit. A fading celebrity takes a black market drug, a cell replicating substance that temporarily creates a younger, better version of herself. Which I don't think is super spoilery. If you did watch the trailer, which I did, that's all kind of clear, I would say.
Yeah. And I don't think that's going to ruin it. If that's the one thing you know going in, I think you get there pretty quick in the movie. It's not as though you're shocked of what's going to happen.
Production, again, is ongoing. Budgets and box office dollars may change, but it's already made its money back. I can tell you that. It was $17.5 million. It's made to date $32.3 million, which is not a blowout. But I also feel like this is, you tell me what you think. I feel like this is a slow burn.
It's a snowball going down a hill right now. And I was surprised how packed the theater was when we saw it, because it had already been out for a couple weeks.
And I think they moved it into a bigger theater, because I had looked a couple weeks ago when I was first recommended this, and it was in a much smaller theater. Like, all the showings were in a much smaller theater. And then when we booked this one, it had moved to the big theater. So interesting stuff. Okay, so we can get into it, but what would you, and I'm going to just take your lead here because I don't know yet. What's your spoiler-free rating?
Oh my goodness. So
I know, doesn't it still feel so hard? Like,
it's hard to know where I fall on it, because this is another one, and I said this a million times going into it to Janelle and to you, of just body horror is not really my thing. I can appreciate it. I'm a big horror fan, but body horror is the one subgenre that I don't particularly love. Even classics like The Fly, which I've heard this kind of compared to.
Which I'm going to pause you. For those who maybe don't know, can you explain what body horror is? We might have some novices here. I don't know.
So body horror, there's kind of two elements, and this is me speaking. I am by no means an expert on this, and somebody could probably explain it better than I do.
What do you mean by body horror?
In the casual way, I would say there's two elements to it. Body horror, first off, the subject matter is typically around something happening to the human form. There's, obviously The Fly, where he's slowly mutating and getting grosser and grosser throughout the film and becoming this fly creature. There's another one called Bug with Ashley Judd and Michael Shannon, where they are paranoid that they got these bugs inside their body and they're just in a room scratching themselves to scabs throughout the home. It's insane. But that's sort of the subject matter of body horror. But the thing that I don't love about it is the way that it tends to be shot, which is lots of sort of gross out visuals of zooming in. And they do it in this film. We'll get to that. They do it on stuff that doesn't even have to do with the body elements, but they intentionally are trying to kind of gross you out. There's a lot of squishy sound effects and really gross visuals. I would even say, like, if the Thing had been a human body doing those things as opposed to this alien creature, the Thing might be considered body, because it's just got those crazy effects and these gross out, like, what the fuck? How did that happen? That's how I would define body horror.
Yeah, there's absolutely a lot of that. I mean, I don't think there's any argument there. It's well, as we know, I'm not like a huge horror person to begin with, but there are horror films that I really enjoy, and they do run the gamut. I think, like, it's just a healthy mix of certain types. I think for me, it's just more about the story. And so, but there are things that I will put up with in a really good story that I wouldn't watch in a less quality story. I agree with you. If it's like really, grotesque and violent and like just that body horror aspect that you're talking about, and the story sucks, I'm just not going to watch it. Like, I'm not going to keep watching it. But if the story is interesting or intriguing, or at least thought-provoking like this one is, I'm like, I can power through. Like, I have questions, So I still don't know what my rating is, though. I feel like we still have come back around.
If I had to sort of off the top of my head right now, I think the back half of my comment was going to be, yes, it's body horror. It's not a genre I typically love. But to your point, I think the story this is telling and the sort of moral at play and the lesson, which we'll get into, I think of what the lesson is in this shit, is pretty profound. And I think it's a message that you haven't really seen portrayed in a film, to my knowledge, very, very often. So I'd probably land right around that same IMDb rating. Like I'll start at a 7.5. For now, and go from there. Of like, I had a great time watching it, aside from being grossed out, and I thought the message was really cool, but it's not something that I particularly want to sit down and watch again. It's also a little long for me. I think 220 was a bit of a stretch for what they accomplished in this, but that's
it's
sort
funny.
of
I didn't even notice that. I mean, I did check it afterward, but I didn't even notice how long it was. I was pretty engrossed. So I think my gut check note here was like 7 ? I feel like 7 ? is probably a good place to start.
Well, let's start there, and then let's discuss, and maybe we'll change by the end.
Maybe. All right, kids, you know the drill. Turn around, don't drown. It's spoiler time.
Here we go. Where do you want to start?
Oh my God, I have no idea. There's so many things to start at. I think one of the low-hanging fruit is to talk about the ways in which this is an homage to so many horror films of the past. But I also think, and this was what I wish I would have just recorded my conversation with Skylar on the way home, because same thing, we were just like banding about all these ideas. And the first thing that came to mind to me was like, this is a truly avant-garde film, I would say. Like, this is a very piece of avant-garde art, which is usually something that you've never seen before, or is breaking new ground, or is totally different, or maybe like hard to receive even typically. But what is interesting about this film is that while it is simultaneously avant-garde, it is also paying homage to all these other films. And I think that is a very interesting and delicate balance to strike. And the things that came to mind, and we were walking out of the theater banding some of those about, but you know, like The Shining with the blood coming down the walls, and even just the carpeting in that hallway is close to the same carpeting. And then also we felt like on the stage, like you mentioned, Carrie, that was a great call out of.
It was like she's in the prom dress, basically. There's blood everywhere. They tint all the lighting red from the blood. Like, it was very
And people
Carrie.
are seemingly trapped, right? And being saturated and like that. And then she's center stage and she's just kind of losing it. And so it was such a great call out. Another one, I think, like, you get this monolith vibe. There's this upshot multiple times. You get this like 2001: A Space Odyssey moment.
Yep. They play the music too.
They even play the music. Exactly. They literally play the music. This is a subtle reference that you and I didn't talk about, but I think the fundamental story here is very all about Eve, which I know you haven't seen yet.
I haven't seen that
but
one.
It's a classic film. It's black and white film. And it is all about the up and coming starlet replacing the old classic, you know, Oscar winning tenured actress star who's a legend, but is old news. Right. And this is a very similar dynamic in that this younger version is just as ruthless as this younger, albeit sweet seeming version in All About Eve. It's a very similar dynamic, and that like really resonated with me. And then Mommy Dearest, even like Demi Moore has some very Mommy Dearest moments, even as she's aging, where she's like, they have almost this mother-daughter, it's not quite, but like an almost mother-daughter kind of dynamic as their relationship progresses, as the movie goes on. And I see some of that Mommy Dearest type dynamic. There are so many great references. Psycho is another great one.
Multiple I think they have to be intentional, right?
Oh, 100%. 100%.
Like, I mean, unless it's just, and you can chalk this up to a second-time director who is French and making this, you know, American feeling film, and maybe paying homage intentionally or unintentionally. But some of the shots seem almost replicated from the original, and I thought that was pretty cool. You just talked about sort of like the classiest element of this film. I'd like to talk about the nudity, if we can.
Of course.
Let's
take a hard right turn. I love it.
The thing is, like, I'm saying that as a joke, but I thought this film did such a cool thing, whether you want to see it as cool or not. I think women and men are going to see this movie differently, not to break it down into two genders, but I think there's going to be two very distinct viewpoints on this film. And for women, I think it's mostly going to be sort of about that self-image and how do you feel about yourself now? Do you pine for how you were 10 years ago, but then 10 years from now, how are you going to feel about your current? So I think there's that message, which we can dig into as we get later into the film. But as a guy, as a straight male watching this, obviously at the beginning, like there's lots of nudity and it's this focus on just this younger, more healthy body that Demi Moore gets placed into.
But they do a good amount, before you move on, they do a good amount of showing Demi Moore in her current initial state.
And props to her.
And
she's
they don't
playing a
shy away from
50-year-old.
that.
She's 61 at this point in real life.
Yeah.
And like respected Demi Moore for one, being comfortable enough to play this role, but two, looking damn good at 61.
Yeah, first of all, she looks incredible. And I'm not going to add the asterisk for her age. She just looks incredible.
Yeah.
And if you know anything about the history of Demi Moore and nudity, she's always been at the forefront of being groundbreaking in film and being brave on camera and vulnerable. And I think this is maybe the most vulnerable she's ever been for that reason, to your point of she's inevitably going to be compared to her prior versions. So in that way, it's a bit meta as well of like, we're not just looking at this actress looking at her body years later. We're looking at this actress in real life whose body we have seen before. And she's letting us see it again in this very vulnerable state and inevitably opening herself up to judgment as a result.
Yeah, I think this is going to be one of those movies, I believe, in 5-10 years time where we can't imagine anybody but Demi Moore playing this role because of her history in Hollywood and where she's been for the last couple decades, and now coming and doing this. I think it's a really smart move for her. I had read a quote from her that she looked at taking this film role the same way she did taking Ghost back in the day. And she's like, this is either going to be the best career move of my life or a huge fucking mistake.
Right.
But that risk is what pulled her into this one, the same as it did Ghost, which was another box office behemoth. So, but backtracking, as a straight male watching this, your eyes are drawn at the beginning to all this nudity. There's like, female form on the screen. They hammer it home. Like at one point, even in my head, I'm like, okay, I get it. Like she's got a nice butt.
It's so
like,
funny you say that because Skylar said the same thing. He was like, the nudity was almost distracting. Like it was distractingly sexual. Everything was so sexualized early on. You aren't just seeing their body to see their body. You're seeing their body to see it as a sexual entity. And he felt the same way.
Yeah, I made the joke to Janelle on the way back. I was like, I think we needed more Margaret Qualley like butt shots. Like I think that's what but I was obviously kidding. But like their intention, I think it's a directorial, and she wrote and directed this, Coralie, intentionally almost making you sick of it to make it less of an object over. It's like we're an hour and 45 minutes into the film and we're still getting these shots. It's like, I'm
over the butt shot. Yeah.
So I think it's desensitizing you to the female form over the course of the film. Again, that might just be my interpretation, but I found that interesting as I watched.
Yeah. And I think, as just to give the woman's perspective on that, you are looking at it from a comparative standpoint, like not only yourself, but also the characters. You're like, because at first you are intrigued. You're like, what am I supposed to notice about this? Like, what am I supposed to see about this? Even the downward shot inside the shower where you can obviously see their breasts like protruding, and the difference in both of their bodies and the difference in their posture in the shower, right? Even like how does my physicality change throughout the movie in the shower? And that becomes very critical. And like the Psycho reference is really important there. Of you see the posture of Demi Moore's character change and slump and get shallow and almost to the fetal position in the shower eventually. But I feel like that's how I was analyzing it, is like, what is changing here? But then you also saw this young woman in Margaret Qualley's character where they almost make her seem fake, but on purpose. Like she is presented as this picture-esque example of beauty and a young woman. And I'm not accusing them of this at all. I did not look into it, but it's almost like she's purposely photoshopped to be intangible, to like be unreal, of like, we're going to show her ass up close, her face up close, her body up close, and she's going to look fucking airbrushed even in the shots.
Well,
and like,
sorry to interrupt, but saying that, so her breasts in the film are prosthetics.
Right.
those are not the actresses. So that, to your point of like, this is not a
This is not
female
a
form.
real
This is
form. But I think that's part of the point, right? Like, even
Mhm.
again, without me even looking at it, you're supposed to look at this person and their seeming perfection and go, this is not real. This is
Yeah.
impossible. And I think it's supposed to get the wheels turning. And it does, it starts, but like, it's almost like a runaway train. You know, I feel
Mhm.
like you don't get to fully flesh out in the movie. Like, I think it's impossible while watching the movie to fully flesh out what your gut instinct is about any one scene. Because before you know it, you're on to the next crazy stimuli. You know, like there's just one stimulus after another. And I think it takes a lot of time to process this film for that reason, you know?
Yeah, I thought it was a smart decision on the part, again, of the director writer to have this be Demi Moore's character as this fitness guru, which
Mm-hmm.
means that she's working at this network, she's doing this sort of old school workout routine, but then by the time the younger self takes over, it still feels very 80s, and they've got like
Yeah.
the suits on and
Yeah.
the
She
tall
doesn't
socks,
modernize it
like,
in that way that you would expect. Yeah.
and I liked that visually, like to your point about it kind of looks fake, but I liked that faux glossiness of like a magazine
Yes.
cover anytime they're in that TV
But like
studio.
an 80s look, like to your point,
Mhm.
remember the glamour shots of the 80s? Like it's
Yeah.
literally just an airbrush. There's a crazy filter on it. The whole scene looks like that in every single scene. Um, and it's almost like it's interesting. I have to give credit. Skylar said another thing that I thought was really an interesting way to look at it is he was like, it's almost like if they made Barbie into a horror film. Like
Yeah.
the imagery is very similar, the aesthetic, the bubblegum pop of her, the characters. She's supposed to again look like basically a Barbie. But it's like, what if this story takes a really dark turn? What if Barbie takes a really dark turn? And I do think some of the big message about Barbie is about not just body positivity, but like personhood positivity. Like I am a
Yeah.
valuable whole person without, external societal expectations on me, blah, 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 blah. But this is like, what if you lived in the world where that is not, I am not a valid whole person unless these things are true, unless my body is perfect, unless I am consumable, packageable, sexualized, sellable. I don't have value unless they quote, love me for
And
these things.
that's a good segue to talking specifically about the character of, I want to get into like how much of these two, because we're told throughout the film, you're one person, stop pretending that's another person. And that was a little confusing, but I want to touch base on Elizabeth Sparkle's character of how did you interpret, because she does seem to have that mentality of being raised in fame essentially, and trying to sort of grasp onto it and
Yeah.
needing people to like her for how beautiful she is, and
Yes.
that's sort of what leads to this entire conflict. But I guess, what were your thoughts on her am I misreading her character? And then let's get into sort of the dynamic between the two of them.
No, I don't think so at all. I think what you're seeing with her is that yes, her value to date has been predicated upon her looks and again, how packageable, how sellable, how much she can be as monetized as possible, right? Like
Mhm.
if she is selling, if she is getting views, if she is sexualized, if she is beautiful, then she is successful and has value. And I think you see that she has been trained by society, by the world, and affirmed by herself that that is the case. But you see at very interesting moments also her own internal battle with that of like, am I like fine as I am? Is it okay? Like, am I okay? She spends a lot of time, for example, looking at herself in the mirror and going when she's Demi Moore in the original state,
Yeah.
like looking at her body and not definitely judging it, definitely assessing it, but almost like questioning it. And I would be lying as a woman, and I don't know. I would assume most other women do the same, where at one point or another, you do look at yourself naked in the mirror and you go like, is it fine? You know what I mean? Like you
Mhm.
like self-analyze, you really do. And I think you see her do that, ascertain that she is not enough as a result of all the other things, and that in order to be loved, she has to take extreme measures. And the one time I see that falter for her is when she meets that guy from her past from high school who doesn't know
Mhm.
her as a famous person, and that's the one person who makes her second guess like, okay, so like I'm still beautiful. I'm still the most beautiful person in the world. I have
Hmm.
aged. I'm
To
different.
this guy, yeah.
To
Yeah.
this guy, I'm still the most beautiful person in the world. So I'm fine, right? I'm fine the way that I am. And it's the one time she questions it, and I wish it held up, but it doesn't, obviously.
That of all the like stuff that made me shudder and squirm in this movie, that entire sequence where
That
she's getting
scene.
ready for the date and
Yes.
slowly redoing herself and comparing herself to the billboard outside,
Yes.
and that was heartbreaking to watch.
Heartbreaking. And I think the other thing that's interesting, and I don't know if you noticed this too, is like every adjustment she did ultimately looked the same. Right? Like
Mm,
she redid all of her makeup and it looked exactly the same as when she started. She redid her hair and it looked pretty much the same. She rejiggered her dress, looks pretty much the same. She's looking at it and she's trying and she's trying and she's trying to change it. She's trying to make something appear that's not going to appear because the raw product is X, right?
yeah.
And she's trying to make Y. And X is beautiful, by the way, but she wants Y because the billboard outside of her own fucking house and in the reflection of her mirror and all the things is telling her that X is not good enough and she needs to be Y. And it's devastating. It's devastating to watch. And I think that had she been able to get herself out of that door, this would have been a different story.
Yeah, I think this movie, we said at the beginning, it has some lessons in it, and I think that's one of them to take away from this as you watch this is like you do not need to compare yourself, not just physically, but everything that we have in the world, money and accomplishments and all these
Yeah.
things. You don't need to compare yourself to every single other human being on the planet. You just need that one person who loves you the most of anybody in the world. That's what we're all looking for. So
And like for who you authentically are. And I
yeah.
think like that's her moment clinging to that of like, this person remembers me for Lizzie, for
Hmm.
who Lizzie was and is interested in Lizzie and not just interested, is excited to reunite with this person. And she's so close to leaning into whoever that person is. And you see her personality kind of shift and change when she talks to him. And I can also see her own awareness actually when she makes the choice to call him. She's doing that for a reason. She's doing that to get back to this other self, to find like her own self-worth, to find her own history, to not be a product, but to be a person. You can see that mental gymnastics that she's doing, or at least I think you can. And I just wish that she had closed the loop and gone on the date because I think she would have been completely validated. And instead, she ends up in a dark room, devastated that she doesn't look like this person that, again, wouldn't exist if it wasn't for her.
Yeah. Yeah. I want to make another hard left turn because I want to talk about just, I feel like you have to talk about the visual effects in this, whether it's the
Oh, gosh,
little
yeah.
makeup effects, whether it's the creature design at the end, like just the different versions that we see of Demi Moore slowly withering down and becoming this creature. Like, what were your reactions to that as somebody who wasn't super familiar with like the body horror concept, I guess?
I mean, I think my thing there was that I was trying to think of all the words I would use to describe the visuals in this film. And it was really hard to not only pick one, but to like find several that felt like they fully encompassed it. And the things that came to mind initially and continue for me are it is visceral. Like the
Yeah.
way that this is shot is visceral. It is revolting. There are so many moments that and I'm like, I have a strong stomach. Like, I do not get really torn or thrown by visuals that are really rough on the whole, but it is revolting. It is meant to make you feel repulsed by it. And you
Yeah.
are. It is effective. And those scenes are grotesque. Like every single one where she is first transitioning and separating as a result of the substance, how her back breaks and she comes out of it,
Mhm.
like even that in and of itself, you're like there's no way to come back from that. And then it gets more grotesque, the way that
Yeah.
she's quote unquote healing from that and putting her back together. And it's just truly disgusting and lurid, and but fascinating to watch. Like you're totally engrossed by it, but
Yeah,
you
I
are.
told Janelle that on the way back of like that's the other thing about, that's why body horror, it's doing exactly what it's intended to do, but that's what I don't like, is that they force you to linger on things for
Oh,
way
you
too long. You know,
linger.
it's like, it's not enough to have her yank out one of her teeth. We have to watch her pull out like 3 in a row.
3
It's,
of her
I get
teeth.
it. I understand what's happening. I
Yeah.
don't need this to keep going, and that's just one of my personal qualms with this type of horror.
I do think especially toward the end it was getting to be too much. It's already a lot early on where you're processing this like crazy transition that is happening that you have no idea what to expect, and then it gets fucking wild. But it does get worse. Like even when she's cooking later, as her body has started to deteriorate and she's trying to torture Sue by overeating and torturing, whatever. She, like, that is disgusting. Even the way she is cooking, even all the food she is eating is
Remind me of
disgusting.
the way that she looks in that scene, and them cutting back and forth to her making random food, splashing herself. It was sort of like Wicked Witchy. Like it
Yeah,
looked like
it
we
was.
were in the middle
Oh,
of the
it
woods in Macbeth.
absolutely
Like,
was. It was very Wicked Witchy. It was very like, I am making a potion,
yeah.
and she has the crazy like coarse, frizzy, grayed hair, and her skin
Mm-hmm.
is sallow and wrinkled, and half of her body is literally deteriorating. And the visual is, it's not even just that she's old. Like, that's not it. You're not looking at it and going, oh, she's ugly and she's old. You're like, this person is
Like
fucking
unhinged.
unhinged. Yeah,
Yeah.
this person is cracking. And that's the thing that's hard to look at,
I
actually,
even
not
told
her
Janelle
physique.
that like the monster at the end is very impressive. Obviously, really cool prosthetics. I love the Demi Moore head on the back
With the
shoulder
just like,
with the mouth
why?
open,
Yeah.
unable to speak, showing that they're both sort of in there at this point. But I thought just the finger at the very beginning getting like
Was
super
really
old
gross.
overnight. I was like, oh my goodness, like that caught
Yeah.
me off guard.
And I think too, what's interesting about that to me, again, is very indicative of like the just relentless ambition from Sue, that she
Mm-hmm.
can see the deterioration of this person's body, that, on which she is literally surviving, and not react, not care, maybe not even notice early on, because she has
Yeah.
built literally a room to make it as hard to see her as possible. It's dark, it's dank, it's isolated. She doesn't have to pass her every day. She's trying not to look at the thing that she's doing.
Yeah.
But even so, she has to see it more than once, how bad it's getting. And she does not let that hinder the decisions she keeps making, because again, the ambition is real. Her need for that adulation outweighs any potential empathy she might have for this person. Arguably none. I mean, it deteriorates. She has none at the end.
So that was going to be my question that I really wanted to touch on, was what was your perception of the dynamic in this, of is it literally the same person in both of these bodies just making, because see, I
I'm
was
so
shocked at the
glad you
beginning.
brought that up.
Yeah, it seemed like at the beginning, the first time they sort of, I'm using the word disagreed on something, I was like, wait, why can they not make this work? It's been like 2 weeks and
Yes.
they're already
They're
breaking the
already fighting.
system.
Yeah.
But I have a line that stands out to me, but I'll let you, what do you got?
Well, I just think it's such a great call out, because I had the exact same thought process of, at first you're like, okay, so they're the same person. The way it's presented to you, potentially, at least to me, was this separates you physically and creates a younger version of yourself. And the reason you can't run both bodies, so to speak, at the same time is because your consciousness is in that body,
Mm-hmm.
and this other body just needs to be fed and sustained in that time. And you come to find out over a hot minute that they're not actually truly sharing, at least not 100% of the same
Yeah.
consciousness, because they don't remember each other's things, but they are getting similar dreams, and they're not taking care of each other's like challenges, pains. Like if she was in her body and fully felt the consciousness of the Elizabeth challenges, of the pain that she was going through, she probably couldn't have kept doing it. And so you get this awareness that they actually are two people out of the
Yeah.
same cells,
That
which I
was
think is
my
maybe supposed to
thought.
be like a twin effect, like of this is a twin, but not you.
That's what I was having trouble sort of coming to grips with that during the movie, because again, the scientist or whoever's on, and maybe it's just them misrepresenting their product, but they
Yeah.
continually tell her, we can't do anything about her. There is no her. It's only you. So just do
Yeah.
better and respect the fucking
But I
program.
think that is like, just going back to the science of it all, that was what was hardest for me to process. And I don't mean like, oh, this isn't real. Well, fucking duh. But I more mean like this girl, this substance, and Elizabeth just single-handedly upended 40 years of dare. You know what I mean? She was just like, let me just shoot that shit into my arm. I have no idea what it is. There's no instruction packet. And the thing is, like, they even show you the packaging. They show you, quote unquote, every step. You supposedly see it all. And there is not a lot of detail. There's not even like some of the care they take to, quote, feed each other right after that. You don't have any insight into how they know how to do that. It doesn't really connect for me.
I'm remembering me like unpackaging my first Amazon Echo Dot and like looking at the instructions of like, okay, so how do I hook up the Bluetooth to it? And meanwhile, they're just like, oh yeah, 7 days of food, out it comes, like into the spine.
And let me intravenously and put this needle in your arm. And I've never done this in my life, but I'm going to find a way to feed you and move you and all these things and do a fucking spinal tap, you know, like, but you're going to do it successfully over and over and over and over.
And the way so, that wound got grosser and grosser.
Oh my God.
That was rough.
That hurt to look at, you know what I mean? Yeah. And that was just one of the things that disconnected for me a little bit. And I'm not even saying it's bad. I'm just saying I was like, who would do this?
You want to like
who would actually do that? I want to understand who would do this. And I think maybe it's supposed to be just indicative of her desperation, of her willingness to just fucking try anything.
That's where I was going to take this. And I can't take full credit because I feel like I probably came home and jumped on Reddit as soon as I got back from the movie and was like looking at the comment thread.
I tried so hard not to look at anything, actually.
Well, I wanted to like ask a couple questions. So like somebody on there had said that she does have a line of dialogue where she talks about the fact that she hates herself at the end of the day. So that would kind of be like, well, maybe she wasn't a great candidate for this after all. If you already hate yourself and your body, you're not going to want.
But isn't that the thing, though? If you're doing
substance.
This,
we did the thing with the Prime Cut guys.
So cute. No, I think that's the thing, right? You can't do this unless you hate yourself. You don't do this because you love yourself. You don't do this because you see value in yourself. The only people who take this substance, including the guy who assessed her as a candidate. I was going to say,
we're 2 for 2 on people that are pissed off at their younger selves.
But also that had to have hated themselves. Yeah. Like, that's the thing. This is a guy who hated his previous version of himself as well. And it's interesting that you can have this self-hate and continue to chase that adulation and that love, even though at this point, it's the thing that's destroying you. Mm-hmm. And that self-hate runs so deep that you still have to keep going for it, you know? And it becomes that, like you mentioned it earlier, and this is one of the things that I said to Skylar too, is like, it reminds me of the plastic surgery cycle that you just see so many celebrities and just people fall into, of, like you said, I hate this version of myself. I want to look like I looked 10 years ago. How do I get that back? And then you do that and you break something in that process, or you look different in that process. So you have to change something else to look as close to that as possible. And then 10 years down the line, you hate that version of yourself that you actually thought was so much more beautiful than you are now. And it's like the never ending firmware update that never, ever stops, because every time you do one, you're breaking something else. And it just becomes this cycle of, I'm always chasing the thing before, the thing before, the thing before. And ultimately, none of it was ever good enough, because at my core, I just hated me.
Yeah, I think you nailed it on the head. And I think that's a good segue to kind of the last thing I wanted to talk about was, what was your big takeaway from this? Because I think I said at the beginning, I do honestly, when this started, I was sort of like insecure looking at this young, beautiful body on the screen. By the end of it, you're like, you know what? My body's not so bad. So maybe it is a very body positive film.
I think it's a commentary. I don't even know that I would go so far as to say it's body positive, because I don't even know that it is asking us to change the things that we find valuable, or if it's just holding up a mirror and saying, here are the things you give a shit about, and this is what happens. And I feel like it's certainly a judgment and an indictment in that sense. But I don't know that it's imparting a message at the end of the day because of the way that it ends, because of the bleak ending of it all. Of she has become this monster, like you said, which is graphic and grotesque and like very well done, who just assaults anyone and everyone around her with her, like literally saturates everyone in blood, and then breaks apart into just her head, which is Demi Moore's head at the beginning, but in its, you know, grotesque form, and it rolls over her star on the Hollywood Walk of Fame that is cracked and abused and all the things, and she's smiling because she's on her star and she had her moment. And it is the worst lesson in the world of she has gone through this horrible, grotesque experience, but she's here on her star and she was famous and she was loved in the way that she thought that she wanted to be. And so it was good enough.
Yeah, I think when I say that that's the message I took, it doesn't mean that that's the message that the main character learned. But I think that's what I walked out feeling, was like, oh shit, don't do this, you know?
Yeah, I mean, I think that's definitely the indirect message, but I don't know that it does the work as a film of connecting the dots for us. I think it does a lot
I think
of
that's okay to leave it open.
Yeah, I think it just does a lot of judging of us, and it does a lot of indictment of us as people. And one of the things that made me wonder about, like, just I would love to hear from you. I think it's very frequently talked about and pretty, I think, obvious that women are always judged by their appearance, and there's an incredible amount of pressure put on your value as it relates to how you look, and to a degree that doesn't feel like men can totally empathize. And I'm just curious, like, I know that I'm not to say men have no insecurities, I'm not saying that. Did this put that into perspective for you at all? Because even if you look at the men in this film, like a Dennis Quaid, there's no pressure on him to look any kind of way, right? There's no pressure on him to eat any kind of way. Him and all his little bro club are literally dancing around, having the time of their lives, and eating disgustingly and eating whatever they want and acting however they want and treating everyone, all the women around them, as objects. So it's again validating of the pressure is not on them to be anything. The pressure is on her. Like, did you feel like you could empathize with her experience at all?
I think it's a lesson that I was pretty well aware of prior to this movie. I think if you're, you know, in 2024 progressive in any way, you're probably already not comfortable, but it's like you've accepted that of women are judged differently than men. And you can take the other, I'm not going to get on a soapbox about, you know, men's problems, but it's like, I'm sure there are guys out there that are going to be like, well, men are expected to be strong and they're expected to be the breadwinners and blah, blah, blah. You can take that road if you want to. I'm not going to take that road. But just to have that devil's advocate thing out there, we also have to touch on the fact that the best shot in the entire movie is all the old men happily dancing down the hallway for like way too long.
It was insane. I was like, they're just dancing away. Wow.
But yeah, it is. It's a double standard for sure. And yeah, Dennis Quaid plays his part to a T in this. He is hateable. I will say, I thought that scene specifically with like pretty girls must always smile was, even Janelle agreed, a little on the nose. I'm like, I get it. We already know that. Where, you know, you could have just said, I
agree.
Smile.
That was a little over the top.
But yeah, but I'm with you, dude. I think that was absolutely the point, and I think the reason that we have the Dennis Quaid character is not just because of the power dynamic, but him being the one that is passing judgment on, like, you're too old to do this now. I need a younger model. But meanwhile, he's the fat cat, you know, still getting rich off of these young girls.
I also like at the end though, where she's, you know, she's in her monster form and she's about to go off on the whole audience, and he is like turning to the other fat cats, the old white guys of the establishment, and being like, you're gonna love her, I handpicked her, I created her, you know, whatever bullshit he's saying. And then this fucking monster walks out, and I was like, yes, the egg on his face.
Random shot of him after everyone's covered in blood. I thought it was weird because they're showing all the crowd in horror, but they show Dennis Quaid sitting there covered in blood, and he's more just like in disbelief.
He's just staring. Yeah,
and I have to think that was intentional, right? Of just like, what the fuck is this? Like, he's like disappointed, but not quite shocked. It was just a strange look on his face.
It was. I think he was just looking at it in disbelief. But I think the tether there was, of course, he's seen her in that dress, you know, less than an hour ago, right? And he has seen her, and he's like, what the fuck happened to her?
Mm-hmm.
Because it still is implied that he has connected the dots, that it's her, right? It's still her. And because she's in the dress and what happened, like, it just can't compute that she would be in this form. And any other normal person would be like, who's this random monster that has come to play, And I think he's trying to process what she has become. And I think also, why would she be on that stage if that is what she became? And I think that's, again, coming back to her just chasing that fame, chasing that love, chasing that adulation, no matter what she actually ends up looking like. Because if this were a real story, you just wouldn't walk out there.
But she puts on the dress.
But
She
she
does the
puts on the
earrings. The
dress.
earrings, adorable.
Oh my God, the earrings,
You
the
know.
whole scene. She's like, I'm going to make myself as pretty as possible.
But
and she
she
goes out there anyway.
She still covers up Demi Moore's face with the garment. So I'm like,
Yeah.
that's still telling you that she's ashamed of that part of herself. It's very
Dude,
weird.
it's so all about Eve, mommy dearest. It's so like, I am the one now. I am the up and coming one. You can't take my fame. You can't take my beauty. Like, it is that, just at its core, that cutthroat ambition. I think it's fascinating. It's an interesting film. So
I think before we wrap, the last thing that I had on my sort of checklist was, I did like sort of the twist this took. I don't know where I exactly foresaw this going, but I did not have it on my bingo card that she would essentially go to kill her new self, change her mind. To your point, it's kind of mirroring the entire going out to dinner sequence of she's trying to accept that this is how she is, but she just cannot take that last little step off the edge, right? And so here she puts in 90% of the termination vial, but ends up reviving her younger self, and then her younger self immediately turns on her. And I guess there's a loophole there where now you can both be awake at the same time. We have this fight sequence.
Yeah.
I don't know, any reaction to that?
I think that is the turning point. Like, we've been building and we've been building, and this is the climactic moment, and this thing that you think is impossible then happens because of this unexplained termination X factor. And I think you see that Elizabeth Sparkles still has some level of care and empathy for this other version, because she feels responsible. She feels like she created her. She even says that. She's like, you wouldn't exist without me. And so she still feels somewhat of a tether, albeit competitive, to this person. And that's why she backs out at the last minute. And it also, again, is the only access she has, as far as she can tell or feel, to love, to affirmation, to all of that. So she can't ultimately let that go. And I think when Sue comes back and they're both conscious at the same time, Sue sees is, I'm awake, she's awake,
right?
I can take her out.
It's very reactive.
It's
like
very reactive.
Kinda,
it's like, that's just her instinct. Her instinct is pure survival, pure ambition. And you see that again later when she puts the activator in her arm, which has been made very clear is not to be used again. And she is at a point where she cannot survive without something. And it is just, again, pure survival. And she'll take anything over nothing. Over no validation, no
I will
existence.
say again, to my point of a 2 hour and 20-minute movie, thought that fight sequence could have been a little short. The mirror would have been a fine place to end that fight, but again, it gets stretched out for another 5 or 6 minutes, and I didn't really need the kicking.
I was gonna say I was just about to say the kick was like real over the top, and you're like, okay, she's like a new version of her, but she's not a fucking superhero. Like, she's not kicking her across the room. It feels a little excessive. But
what's up with was there a message in all this sort of like hallway shots? I mean, we know that there's the Shining reference, but there's so many like long hallway shots throughout this. We talked about the funny old man one, but there's the way her apartment is laid out. There's kind of like, I didn't know if that was something deeper from the director's perspective, like, oh, it's like a transition, a hallway is kind of this segue from one thing to another. I don't know. I might be just grasping for straws, but
well, I do think it's about like public versus private personas to some degree of like, here's my public image. Here's the great glass wall that can expose you and me to the world. And it's pretty and it's aesthetically pleasing and all the things. But where the place where all the dark shit happens is down this long, dark hallway that you can't really get to easily and that you don't go into. And you also see nobody else ever gets into, even when that guy is there. He can't get into that space. And that is where all the darkest decisions and transitional moments happen for them as characters.
Well, I was uncertain about throwing that bullshit theory of mine out there. I'm glad I did, because I really like what you just said. And also,
I'm just here to connect those dots, man. Just give me a layup. I'll do it for you.
And then last thing is, thank God we got a little bit of man ass in this. We got some man butt, not a ton, but I was like, okay, we got a little bit.
If we want to be extra shallow, the way that they're treating the women, like he could have waxed first. I'm just saying.
Like, I think that was intentional. You're saying double standard of like,
oh yeah, the double standard is very
hairless.
clear. Yeah. Like, I don't need to see your ass crack hair. Thank you so much, but we definitely got it. So thanks for that. Thanks.
All right, so we've talked for 50-ish minutes.
Where are we at on the post review rating?
I think I'm gonna stay put. I think 7.5 makes sense. Not gonna repeat anything from the beginning. It's not my. I think if I were more of a body horror fan, I'd probably go as high as 8.5. And I think, like I said, the takeaways are there. It's probably up to your own interpretation, but thought really well put together movie, especially for a second time director. Some really cool practical effects, some great homages, and yeah, I dug it.
Yeah, I think I would probably come up a little, actually, like 7.5, 8, just remembering and even just going through, as you know, I told you at the top, I wrote hardly anything down about this movie because I wanted to just riff on it. And I think that in and of itself is indicative of the quality of it. So for me, it's like, it's not looking at the 5 notes I have written down. It's that you can talk about a movie for an hour that you've done no research on, and you still have a lot to say, and you have a lot of feedback, and you have a lot of feelings about it. And so, like I said, I think it's very thought-provoking, and you can do a lot with this film. And there are flaws, of course, as we've said, there are a few flaws, but it's still very interesting. Very interesting.
Conversation starter, that's for sure.
It really is. And I would, if it's not clear, I would absolutely recommend seeing it. But not only that, I would absolutely recommend seeing it in theaters. It is an in theater experience. You are immersed into the shots and the aesthetic, and it is visceral and grotesque. And the way that it's shot, there's even just these sharp, hard left, right turns, these zoom in, these pans, these up shots, these down shots. Like, the way that it's shot, I think you just can't fully appreciate at home. And so, if you get a chance, I would see it in theaters.
I've become someone, and all of us, I think, have, where when I watch something home, I am tempted to look at my phone and like check if I see my phone light up, like, I enjoy going to the theater because I have no choice, especially at the Draft House, of just being zoned in on the film. And sometimes I think you miss out on stuff when you don't do that, especially 100%. Like this.
100%. I mean, that's why I spend so much time going to movies. I see so many movies in theaters that you don't need to see in theaters, but it is because it forces me to totally pay attention and not be distracted by my life. And I can tell you, I was thinking about nothing fucking else but this movie, watching this movie. And again, I think that's high praise as well about the content in front of you.
Yeah. Well, I guess we can segue into introducing. We're going to have a second episode fucking today.
Yeah. So I would say, first of all, thanks for joining and listening to our, we said mini-sode, full fucking episode about this film. Come back to the feed for our simultaneous bonus episode on The Thing, where we collabed. You may have already seen it by now, but we collabed with the Prime Cut podcast. And so we're going to be guests. Y'all have heard our guests. Now we're guests.
Yeah, so we're following. So this will be on their feed and our feed, where we have a little intro for you guys setting it up. But it'll be in their sort of episode format, which isn't too terribly different from what we do here. But if the flow sounds a little bit different, but we did design a cocktail, which I think is fun.
We brought our vibe to the pod for them.
It was very much a collab for sure.
Fun conversation. It felt like a very easy flow. And go like and follow them as well. But also in the meantime, you can do the same for us.
Yeah, you can follow us on our socials. We drink and we watch things, Instagram, YouTubes, wherever you listen to podcasts. Just get more eyes and ears on the products. And yeah, you can usually see us in video form now too on Spotify and YouTube.
Yes. And thank you for your comments on YouTube, by the way. We're getting a bunch of those. So it's my new favorite thing. But for now, go have a drink and watch a thing. Cheers.
Cheers.
Oh my gosh, my tongue is turning green.